Okay, so today's learning target is I can find and interpret the slope and y-intercept from a real-world table and graph. And so what the difference is we spent time last week looking at how do we find y-intercept and slope from a real-world table and graph. And what we're going to look at today is, well, what does that mean? How do we interpret it? Because remember we talked about real-world situations have meaning in the slope and a meaning for the y-intercept. So let's go take a look at some examples. So here we have a plumbing problem. It says Jimmy works for a local plumbing company. His boss has asked him to come up with a quote for a job that is coming up for one of the company's valued customers. Jimmy produces the table below. So this is our quote right here. The company wants to know what they are charging per hour and if the company charges any kind of service fee. So basically, how much are they going to charge the company to come out and work, and then are they even going to charge them an additional fee on top of the hourly service? So we're going to use this table to determine the cost per hour and if there is a fee incorporated with it. So let's go look at finding the slope. So our cost per hour is going to be our slope. When we're interpreting these real world situations, our slope, like I said, is going to have meaning here. And our meaning is going to be the y per x. So in this case, our cost per hour, or we could have feet per second. So again, when we write these meanings, it's going to be the slope. So whatever our value of our slope is, whatever our y value is, in this case it's cost, per whatever our x value is, which is going to be hours. So like I said, it could be whatever they label it. It could be feet per second, miles per hour. There's lots of combinations here. But remember, it's the y per the x. All right, so let's go look at this. What is the company, Jimmy's company, going to charge per hour? So to find slope, as a reminder, remember we want to find the change in y over the change in x. So how are they, y is increasing or decreasing? By how much? Divided by, are the x's increasing or decreasing, and by how much? So I need to figure out, how do I go from a $140 to $230? Well, I know that's an increase. I need to figure out how much. So we want to find the difference. I can say 230 minus 140. So that becomes 13. That becomes 9, 0. So I have an increase of 90. And all of these are an increase of 90. So my change in y here is 90. So it's increasing $90. Now what we need to figure out is per how many hours. So when I look at the x's, 2 to 4 is an increase of 2 each time. So I have 90 divided by 2, which gives me 45. So the company charges $45 per hour. So that's step one. So now what we need to determine is, are they charging an additional service fee on top of their hourly charges? And to do that, what we need to do is go find the y-intercept. So when we look at the y-intercept, it's going to allow us to determine whether or not there is a service fee if we need to add on a little bit extra, or if they're deducting something or anything like that. Okay, so when we're looking for the y-intercept, remember we need to make sure we have determined our slope. And in this case, we know our slope is equal to 45. And if we're interpreting, right, we said $45 per hour. But for our case of finding the y-intercept, we can just say 45. So the steps for finding the y-intercept is we're going to take all these x values and we're going to multiply them by our slope. So I'm going to say times 45 times 45 all the way down. So when I multiply 2 times 45, I get 90. 4 times 45 is 180. And you notice here that we're not getting these y values. So it means we do have an extra fee on top of what we're charging per hour. So to determine that, I need to figure out, well, what do I add to 90 to make 140? What am I going to add to 180 to make 230? And so on. So in this case, we can just find the difference between 140 and 90. So that means that on top of the $45 an hour, I'm also charging a $50 fee because that's my y-intercept. So when we're looking at the overall interpretation here, not only is the company charging $45 an hour to work, they're charging $50 just to show up. So when you guys are looking at your practice today, it's going to ask you guys a lot about, like, what's the additional fee? Is there an additional fee? If we had come out to a proportional table, meaning that the y-intercept is 0, then there is no additional fee. It would just been straight up $45 an hour. But what we see here is when we look for that y-intercept, we don't get matching values. And so then there is a y-intercept, and that y-intercept is our additional fee. So let's go take a look at what would this look like in a graph. So in a graph, okay, this is a different situation. We're looking at some money here, and we moved away from Jimmy and his plumbing, but we're still looking at the same concepts, right? And so y-intercept has meaning. We've talked about this before in these one quadrant graphs. So if we're looking where the y-intercept is, it's going to be that dot right there. And my y-intercept is 500. Or you can write it as a coordinate pair, 0, 500. And we've talked about the different ways of writing that. But what does it mean? And anytime we have a y-intercept in a one quadrant graph, that's where our starting point is. So in this case, it means that I started, or here Jack started with $500 in his account. So what we need to determine now is, well, what's happening, right? The slope here has a story because it's a one quadrant graph, which means it's real world. It has a story, and what we need to do is figure out what is that story telling us. Some things to notice real quick is that this line is moving downward. So we know that my slope is going to be negative. So when we look for an answer, we definitely need to make sure that this is negative. All right, so remember, when we find slope from a graph, we need at least 2 points. I have one here for my y-intercept. When x is 0, y is 500. And so I need to look for another perfect point as I move down this line. So the only one that I see as I move down this line is going to be right there. When x is 10, and y is 100. So now we need to find our slope using our change in y over our change in x. Here I see as my y's move, I start at 500, I go to it's a decrease going down of 400. So I have a negative 400 as my delta y. Then I look at my x values here. I have an increase of 10. So negative 400 divided by positive 10 is going to give me a slope of negative 40. And so what does that mean, though? If we're looking at this, what does it mean? So when we're looking, like I said, when we're looking at this story of the slope, what it means is that Jack is losing $40, and we're measuring it in hour. So he's losing $40 per hour. So as every hour increases, his money drops by 40. All right, so what you're going to work on now is practice on identifying what does the slope mean. It's a Google slide practice. There's 4 questions, 2 tables, 2 graphs, and you've got to not only just find the slope and the y-intercept for each of the situations, explain what meaning they have. If you have any questions, please let us know. Hope you guys are doing great, and good luck.